I'm Therese Beckman. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm the descendant of multiple Irish people. Lots of family history, lots of family stories, some embellished, some maybe not, but in my research I have found some very interesting characters that represent the influence of the Irish and the Irish sense on American pioneer history. The lines are McSweeney, Sullivan, Flynn, O'Leary, and Murley on one side, and then Maher, Coyne, Welch on the other side. And the McSweeney side always says that we're related to Terence McSweeney, but I can't prove it. So the Maher line is the line I'd like to focus on, since there is a lot about American, particularly Iowa, pioneer history that involves them and talks about in detail what they went through when they left Ireland in 1846. They came through New York and stayed in New York for several years, probably working as publicans, working in pubs, and then also in the mills, saving money and deciding what they're going to do with their lives in America. Within the 10 years that from when they came to when they migrated westward expansion was being promoted by the American government, and land was being given for various reasons. So they took advantage of what was called here in the U.S. Homestead Acts and went westward using the newly developing industry of railroad transportation as their mode of transportation. So the story goes that they traveled west to the end of the line, which in the 1850s was Dubuque, Iowa, where they then went with an axe and a shotgun on horseback to local areas and decided where they were going to homestead. When they homesteaded, living on muskrats and beavers and whatever wildlife was available to them, and then later on sending for their families until whole family cluster groups came to the areas. This was an area of westward expansion that was good for the pioneers, but sadly unfortunate for the natives whose property it really was. So there was multiple conflicts between the Native Americans and the Irish, as well as any other settler that came. There were conflicts that historically have been written by us, the winners, and called massacres, but they were just defending their land against the invasion of the newly arriving immigrants. That was a tide that they could not stop. So some of my ancestors were involved in protecting the land that they were taking as American land. Then this was also the time of the Civil War, and that was they were called into service to protect what was called the Northwest Territory from in the natives. So they had military service that then rewarded them with more land. So essentially, the state of Iowa, Northwest Iowa, was pioneered by my family along with the other families. The image you just saw is a picture of my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Maher, outside of his pioneer cabin that he lived in for 40 years in Iowa. He raised a family that I am a descendant of, and there are many of us because he had 4 brothers and a sister who all had children, although not many of them, not as many survived from his siblings as my family did. We now have, I have 45 cousins that come from this line, some of whom live all over the United States. And we are a reflection of the development of America as a whole, because even though we're all German-Irish, we married people from all over the world with multiple ethnicities, from Scandinavia to Lebanon, and we even have been able to incorporate descendants of the Native Americans, particularly the Sioux tribe, of which unfortunately were displaced by the development of the country. And today they have been somewhat compensated for their land with some Reparations Act benefits. But we definitely are a reflection of the melting pot that America is noted as being today. This is Ann Maher Donahue, my 2 times great-grandfather's sister. The man in front of the cabin was her brother. They part of the family unit that all came to eventually migrated to Iowa, all settling and buying land and developing the land. Land speculation, sales, and purchasing land was one of the ways that they prospered and moved on in life. And one of the aspects of that process was the fact that they often squabbled over who owned the land and who owed what to whom. And I would think that when you came from a place like the Great Hunger, that you would not have petty arguments that drove family members apart. I find that very sad. What I find interesting about my family's development here in America is that they did bring their Irish culture with them, working in pubs, working in the mills, working as entertainers, dancing and singing, holding family gatherings where people were noted for their storytelling. They brought all of that with them, but they also had problems, the same problems drive them apart that persist today. And I would think that when you came from an event as devastating as the Great Hunger, that you would learn to overcome petty squabbles over land or who owned what and who deserved what. But they brought that with them too. Well, a continuation of the westward migration of Irish and the population of the U.S. was from the Midwest to the Southwest. And that's how my family ended up here in Arizona. My parents were benefits of World War II Army service, and college and business opportunities were presented to them to take advantage of. Also, land in Arizona was very inexpensive, so they were able to buy property and develop businesses in Arizona that they might not have been able to do so easily in Iowa. So that's what the big draw to Arizona was, again, land. Arizona is a state with a long history with Mexico. Part of the Mexican territory is where we live now. So I've grown up with the influence of the Mexican culture here in Arizona. I say that I grew up with Motown music and mariachi music as my nurturers. I have multiple friends who are Mexican, and I learned to speak Spanish and make tortillas in their homes from their grandmothers. So I sort of feel Mexican by assimilation almost. I was actually married to a Mexican American man for a while. So I'm very close to the Mexican culture. I just feel as if it's part of me as well. The Irish culture was important, but not a driving force. We were part of the melting pot, and nobody talked about being German or being Irish. We were just Americans. Whereas being part of the Mexican community was different, because Mexicans were known for being Mexican. We had lots of Irish friends, and we went to Catholic school, and Father Sharp was the Irish priest in the school. So we had lots of Irish influence. I think that it was as an adult, though, when I saw Riverdance, it compelled me to really investigate my Irish ancestry. So that's what I've done. And coming here has helped me identify my Irish ancestry, and I love it. Even if Grandma McSweeney was an embellisher, I'm glad. I also do feel very close to the Mexican culture. I still speak Spanish. I still go to Mexican Mass sometimes. I go to the Mexican fiestas. Today actually is Día de los Muertos, Día de Muertos, as they say in Mexico. Here, the Americanismo is to say Día de los Muertos, but that's not how they say it in Mexico. But it's a religious and family gathering event in Mexico to celebrate the fact that we all die, but we want to preserve the memory of our beloved that have passed away. So most families have an altar, and they say prayers and make offerings to the dead and remember them and keep their spirits and stories alive. I understand that today, because of the influence of a movie, an animated movie called Coco, the idea of Día de Muertos is becoming universal. And in Mexico City, they have festivals and parades now, and people dress up in costume, and the colorful masks and flowers are becoming a universal event to celebrate, making it more commercial. But the real essence of the Día de Muertos is to remember our beloved who went before us.